Joining me on this episode of the Football Analytics Show is Matt Waldman. He is the creator, writer of the Rookie Scouting Portfolio, a fantasy football and actually just any football reference. Matt, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks so much for having me again. It's always a pleasure to do this when we're getting close to the draft.
Absolutely. Like, would you call yourself like the writer of Rookie Scouting Portfolio, or like the founder, the creator? It's kind of become a brand of its own, although it's clearly tied to you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the creator of it. I think that's the best way to put it. I create it, I write it, I do the scouting, and develop the process, and thanks to the team of editors that I have every year. I haven't, that would be those would be the folks who make me sound good in terms of making sure that I don't misspell Georgia, the state that I live in. So things like
Right.
that. But otherwise, yeah, creator's fine.
Excellent. And I think of Rookie Scouting Portfolio kind of in my own way. I actually think there are some ways of perhaps getting some betting edges, which I will ask you about a little bit later. But who do you think it's for?
I think it's for football fans. I think it really branches off to a number of people. I mean, it's in one aspect, it's one of the most purchased draft guides for cross-checking purposes for NFL people, according to recruiters I speak to, like Alex Brown, who's at SMU, who was the recruiting director at SMU. Now he's at Ole Miss. So there's a population of NFL people who read the scouting portfolio for football personnel, cross-checking purposes for their evaluations. Fantasy football people, whether it's redraft or dynasty, it fits for them because I give them I translate the football to fantasy football. So there's that. Certainly for draftniks, football fans who really want to get an in-depth look at the skill positions. And I'd say that goes for media who writes they're covering, they're not necessarily always analyzing. So they've come to trust me as a resource that they can learn more about these players. So really, it's for anybody who has a specific interest for evaluation of football talent.
Excellent. Matt, can you describe how you would go about evaluating a player like JJ McCarthy, and then explain why McCarthy was such a difficult evaluation for you this year?
Sure. I mean, with quarterbacks in general, what I do is I have a fairly in-depth checklist of things that I look at. I mean, probably over 100 points of criteria that's defined, and it's scored in a prioritized way of yes or no to get a breadth of talent, just to show from a resume standpoint of what we would expect from a quarterback, at least from the broadest range, what they can do at the bare minimum. Like, do they meet the bare minimum requirement for doing those criteria of things? And then I also look at a depth of talent where I take, the collection of things that they showed they do and really evaluate on how well they can do them based, again, on defined criteria on how I score them for what's the expectation for a free agent who's trying to, enter the NFL draft, make an NFL roster, to a reserve, to contributors. Contributor would be someone who's like maybe a first-year starter or a journeyman quarterback or top-tier backup, and then starter, and then also star. So I stack rank these players according to these different areas of skill sets on how well they can do it. And that really is the grade that I look at. And part of what goes into that grade is how I chart accuracy. So when I watch throws, I'll actually chart their accuracy based on, did they have the velocity necessary to get that throw there for the NFL standard? Do they have the accuracy in terms of placement? Is it placed where the receiver has the best opportunity to make the play? And that may either, and that's pinpoint accuracy. It can be either thrown in stride, or it can be, if it's depending on the coverage or the type of route and the combination of what defenders are around, it may be requiring an adjustment, but at least it's an adjustment that gives only the receiver the chance to make the play. And then there's general accuracy, which is what you see where the receiver may have to make an adjustment outside what would be expected to make the catch, but it's a catchable ball. not something that you would deem a difficult adjustment where you don't expect the receiver to make the catch, but they do so anyway. So I look at those things for a variety of areas on the field, what the type of coverage that they're facing, at least from the standpoint of what I perceive to be man or zone, and then also versus pressure or without pressure. And I create that charting, and I do somewhere between 6 to 8 games most of the time with quarterbacks, sometimes more, and I come up with some accuracy metrics because completion percentage is not a good accuracy metric from my
Right.
opinion. So, and you can see why based on how I describe everything, that you can see how they caught the ball. Well, Baker Mayfield had a lot of catches, but there were certain areas where he was better and certain areas where he was worse. And I think we've gone through that argument in the past. So I do all those things, and then that's basically how I come up with the score. So when I look at JJ McCarthy, the first, difficulty with him is that, decision making is a big part of how I study quarterbacks. And I'm looking at things about how aggressive they are in terms of taking the plays downfield that come open versus just checking down or throwing the ball away when they really had an opportunity to make a reasonably good, like logical attempt at a bigger play, whether it's an intermediate throw or a deep throw. I'm looking for whether or not they understand when to throw the ball away, whether or not that when they are reading the coverage, do they see the position of the defender and the receiver relative to the receiver and know when to throw the ball. Not just whether to throw the ball, but when to throw it so that and where the ball should be placed. So, oftentimes people talk about quarterbacks being able to read coverage, but really what it was is they were able to fundamentally identify it, but they were late with the throw, and that doesn't fly in the NFL. So that's the difference between Baker Mayfield and Patrick Mahomes, or Alex Smith and Patrick Mahomes, So that's something that's very important, and it doesn't always have to do with knowing X's and O's. We often talk about how certain Dustin Desmond Ritter read the whiteboard like a coach pre-draft. That's great, but he has difficulty being able to get the ball out when he should identify what's open and what's not, and throws the ball into situations when it's not open. And you can read those things. And I put it this way, Ed, is like, Alex Smith is a very book smart, intelligent, football diagram smart quarterback who was late a lot. And then when he was late, made mistakes, he overthought everything. He became that neurotic person who's, in your life, who's extremely intelligent, overthinks everything, and misses opportunities in life because they over intellectualized everything. Because they're not performers, they're intellectual, and that's fine. You in academia, you can navel gaze a little bit, more. And I make fun of academics because I know academics, and I used to interview them for a living for about 10 years, in between my operation management gig and doing what I do here. And then there's the performer side, and performers sometimes they screw up, oftentimes they screw up, but they don't, but they're willing, but they have timing, and they're willing to continue to take a chance and not over intellectualize their failures. And Brett Favre's a perfect example of that. I joke that, if quarterbacks were comedians, the best ones have great timing, and they also and their timing helps them land jokes. Brett Favre probably only told fart jokes, but they were funny, and he'd bomb on a lot of jokes. But even if he bombed on them, he wouldn't give up. And that's what made him good. I mean, Bill Burr bombs on a lot of jokes, and people recognize him most of the time as a very funny comedian. Same thing with probably Dave Chappelle. You could look at Dave Chappelle, and I would bet you that he probably bombs on at least 35 to 40% of his jokes. But the ones that he lands on have massive impact, and that's why he has Netflix specials. So when you look at JJ McCarthy and the scope of all of this, what you see is a quarterback who sometimes really lands some zingers, and like some ingenious lines and ingenious stories, in terms of where he places the ball. But there are also times where he royally screws up. And there are some times when you bomb on a joke that you could turn your audience against you. And he has some moments where he does that. I mean, like in the red zone and the black zone, backed up inside your own 20, he makes a lot of immature decisions where he doesn't see the defensive drops. He doesn't throw the ball away, tries to fit balls in that he shouldn't, and is late with his reads. And he has to just get wholly better on those areas because they're the most practiced and most important execution areas in football. And that's where he struggles. At the same time, you'll see him make plays where you say, that was terrific. And so I've even had a quarterback coach say, is he Zach Wilson 2.0? And because Zach Wilson, everyone perceived to have highs, not everyone, but a lot of people perceived him to have highs, and not enough people looked at the lows and said that's an issue, and those are issues that may be harder to teach. And with JJ McCarthy, he has more highs. He has actual highs on his game, but he also has some of those lows. So I would answer that question as he's Zach Wilson 2.0 if you say he's iteration 2.0 and they improved the part where there's actually some highs to his game. But I would compare him more to a Jake Plummer type as a player who like excellent footwork, which Zach Wilson did not have. So the basis for a play action game, quick passing game, getting the ball out fast, being able to execute a lot of schemed plays and be, quick and precise. He has that. He has some ability to work inside and outside the pocket with some adept skill set that Wilson didn't have. A lot like Plummer, but he has to get rid of some of the hero ball and immaturities, and he has to do it especially so in certain circumstances. And the last thing I'd say that makes him difficult to evaluate, in addition to those difficulties, is that some of those throws where you see him making the decisions he did, some of them it's fairly obvious that he was making the decision he meant to make. And there are a few throws there where you go, I'm not sure you really meant to do that. So you kind of wonder if he's fully there on that end. And also, his game beyond 28 yards. I measure the field in 14-yard increments when I'm looking at the depth of the field of where they're throwing. And beyond what I call the vertical, beyond the intermediate range, which is like 27 yards and under, anything 28 yards and over, I didn't see enough of to feel really comfortable. And I don't need a huge sample size when I'm charting. So if I'm telling you I didn't feel comfortable with what I saw from vertical and deep accuracy because he just didn't get enough opportunities, it's an unknown to his game. You'll have some scouts say, well, watch him at the combine or pro day workout. And I'm like, I'm not watching that. Okay. Like, seriously, like it's a rehearsed thing. It's super rehearsed, and quarterback isn't a rehearsed deal. If Dan Marino said, and I mean, I'm going to use him as an example because I thought he made a great point about maybe 15, 20 years ago, where he said, listen, if I'm going to watch a pro day, I don't want scripted stuff. I'd like to get, some actual defensive players and put this kid in some situations where he's got to throw off script and see if he can handle that. That's going to tell me more about him as a quarterback than some rehearsed thing, some ballet recital. So, that was really, and it makes sense to me. So with McCarthy, it's unproven. He may prove he can do it, but I can't grade it. So it's not a significant pass or fail part of my evaluation. But when you combine it with everything else, it is it does add up to make him a little bit more of a difficult evaluation because he's somewhere between a player where I look at him and say, well, is he more scored like Zach Wilson, like a player who's going to need some time to develop before he gets he gets it and can become a good starter? Or is he closer to becoming that immediate starter when he gets on the field and really doesn't have too big of a dip once NFL defenses catch up to what he does and have done enough film study to throw some things at him that he might be able to overcome it. So it's a difference between maybe being a journeyman starter or backup and being a second contract starter. And that's where that difficulty lies.
Excellent. Matt, we often see a quarterback, and I'm not necessarily talking about JJ McCarthy, but anyone quarterback excels in college, and then he gets to the NFL and he just doesn't perform in the same way. So this is, I mean, obviously every player is going to be different, but do you have any is that do you have any generalizations of what's going on there? Like, is it a mental thing? Is it a physical thing? And is it just the speed of play? How do players make that transition, and why do they fail?
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of things that actually do hit. And this is one of my favorite questions because it gets to the root of the problem with why the NFL is so bad at evaluating quarterbacks. And it's not just evaluating, but it's developing. Because the NFL doesn't develop quarterbacks, as we heard Kyle Shanahan confirm to a statement that many of us have been saying for about 10 years, is that they coach scheme and game plan. And that the quarterback and most players, including the quarterback, are responsible for their own development away from the field. They can recruit coaches on their team to help them with certain drills and things to practice, but they've got to do a lot of that work on their own. And the thing is that the NFL evaluates quarterbacks like this. They think the things that you can't teach, and to an extent they're correct, are arm strength, size in terms of height and weight, and certain levels of athletic ability. That's great. You can't teach those things. Fine. I agree. But what they're inadvertently doing is self-selecting players who have those minimums but don't realize that the things that matter more are processing speed, and ability to perform. And so they're looking at quarterback evaluation as a science when it's actually a performance craft. And so I just gave the whole comedian analogy in the last question. And really, that's the thing, is that quarterbacking is about taking the physical, the theoretical of defenses and offensive game plans, the intellectual of memorizing game plans and recall with that, and then the technical of like their footwork and their arm, their releases and pocket movement, and then combining that with the intuitive and spatial awareness of moving around in tight spaces and processing tight traffic, over and around defenders, and being able to integrate all of that into situations that unfold instantaneously. They are jazz musicians more than they are scientists. Okay, and so and jazz musicians have to have the science and craft and the artisticness, artistic inclination basically to do it. And so as a result of that, the NFL they force feed young quarterbacks into starting positions where they haven't fully integrated their game yet. And part of that problem is a lot of things you touched on. One is that they're young and they've maybe just ingrained some of these things. And then they're also like a beat or two slow to get the ball out on time because because the NFL is just totally NFL coaches are totally overly bent on making sure that they can recall plays and recognize coverages. They're not thinking about the fact that the real thing comes down to the triangle of defenders, just like in soccer, where you're looking at three defenders in one quadrant. And whether or not based on the position of those three defenders, whether the ball should come out now. Alex Smith knew everything about the defense that you needed to know. But when he came down to looking at that quadrant, the ball, he waited a beat or two or three to come open. And I joke that he's the economist of quarterbacks who, if you had to read that quadrant and tell whether or not there is a recession, he'd tell you he needs more data. And, and meanwhile, you could lose everything, so, right. Whereas Brett Favre might not know any of the economic theory behind anything, but he'd tell you might want to take your money out of the bank and, do this, or whatever it is that, and give you like salient advice, even if it was done with a Mississippi accent and some fart jokes in between that you're wondering if you should trust them, especially with everything going on in the news. But still, that's the difference. And I think what happens here is that this over intellectualization of the position in the wrong sort of intelligence has forced quarterbacks into positions where they're too slow to react. And when they get punished in the NFL, defenders are better at being able to punish them because they They are savvier at disguising coverages. They are faster at jumping at the ball and undercutting it and cutting it off. So it leads to more turnovers, and they get sacked and hit and punished more often. And when you get punished often enough, you actually develop an emotional memory for that, which creates some trauma. Even if you wouldn't really
Right.
call it trauma,
Oh,
it
Zach
is to an
Wilson. Zach
extent.
Wilson would call it trauma, right?
Yeah, yeah. So with Sam Darnold telling his
Oh, Sam Darnold was the one that saw ghosts, right?
yeah, he is too. But Zach Wilson would too. You're absolutely right about all of that. Both of those guys. And or Derek Carr as a good example, with the Texans. You can be good and then you can regress because if you're overthinking, well, should I have thrown that ball? Well, okay, next time, should I throw that? I see that coverage again pre-snap, and now they want to wait a little bit longer. Now they're going to get hit. Then when they get hit, now they're worried about now their timing gets thrown off because now you're overthinking in one area that throws off the entire chain of movements and skills and techniques and how you time things, and everything goes wrong, and now you get into quicksand and nothing really works and your game regresses, which is why, like, when Dan Orlovsky made the point about trading places with Brock Purdy and Mac Jones, he was right because when I talk to world-class performers and they say, listen, you get better when you play with great performers around you. If you're in an ensemble environment, that's what happens. You get better because they're doing everything they're supposed to do, so you don't have to overthink or worry about overcompensating in one area or not. You're just doing your job, and if you have quick intellectual processing of what's going on, it just flows, and then you're just basically having that validated play after play after play. And when you have a bad play, it's not as big of a deal because you know what happened. You're not questioning too much, or you just don't question as much. But if you're having more plays that are bad than good, you start to question things that you didn't before. Then your game slows down, and then things that you didn't have problems with since high school start to look bad. And then analysts come along and say that guy's got horrible footwork. How did that guy ever get scouted as having good footwork? And fans say that, and they get on X and social media and talk about these guys were wrong in what they said about them. No, it's the fact that their game's falling apart at the seams because of this happening. It's like, the meat's intact with a steak until you put it, and the fat's intact until you sear it on a skillet, and then it all coagulates from that heat, and if you don't let it rest enough, it runs out of the steak
Yep.
and you
Yep.
have no
Sure.
flavor. And that's kind of what happens with this development aspect of it. And it's a long answer
Yeah.
to explain why.
You talk about performance, you talk about comedy. Is it and that kind of maybe defines like the ceiling of an NFL quarterback. Is it fair to say that that's more the mental side of the game?
Yeah, I'd say it's the mental and emotional side. It's both emotional intelligence and mental intelligence. But it filters into your physical expression of technique sometimes because that can deteriorate with it. So yes, it's more definitely mental processing and the emotional intelligence to continue to separate what you screw up on and what your team's screwing up on and what to say and what to do. Because again, you also have to be a leader. So they're also expecting to be a leader quickly. So there's a lot of things that happen like that when you screw up like this. And if the coaches don't handle it right and they bench you and don't even talk to you about it, you're wondering what's going to
Sure.
happen next with your career.
Absolutely.
as
Absolutely.
as opposed to like, Marty Schottenheimer with Drew Brees when he used to bench him often and said, "You're still our guy. You're just not seeing the field right. I'm putting the veteran in, whether it was Doug Flutie or somebody else, and saying, if we get close, I'm going to give you a chance because you need a chance to prove it, and I know that you can, and we want you to have those experiences." And that Drew Brees credited that over anything Sean Payton ever did.
Fascinating. You talk a lot about how the NFL is not good at quarterback development. It seems like you just can't put a quarterback out there in a faster speed of play of the NFL, and he's just going to figure it out. So, like, what are the specifics that you would recommend that a coaching staff do to help develop a quarterback?
Well, it would seem presumptuous of someone who's like a fantasy writer and an independent scout to say this without any coaching experience. But I have been I was in management for over a decade. There are similar management principles that that are important that good coaches have, and there are things that have worked in the NFL that we have observed. And some of the examples I gave. what I think would be valuable, and it's really comes down to what I would tell owners and executives, because I think coaches know this. I think they're just pressured not to do it and told not to do it. And that is bench your quarterback when you need to bench them. And it's not and we begin, and as executives and owners, you need to re-educate the media on why you're doing that. Because when you bench it, you react to the media and what their talk is, and you freak out, as opposed to saying, listen, Terry Bradshaw got benched multiple times. He was a 4-time Super Bowl winner. Steve McNair was given intermittent playing time where he got a few starts during a series or two, and then they put him back on the bench for Chris Chandler for a year, and they increasingly gave him opportunities. They did that on purpose. They gave, they sat Jordan Love for what, 3 years, 3 years. And they knew he wasn't ready because, man, let me tell you, that dude was not
Yeah.
remotely ready.
Yeah, you
And
didn't like. I
and
remember
so
you didn't like him coming out of college.
no, I was like, he's going to need time, and if they draft him the first round, they're going to want to play him. Well, good for the Packers that they had a plan, because they are the perfect example of modern day, of what happens when you give your quarterback enough time, so that when now all they have to do is execute the game plan and get used to reading coverage and reacting to their players, their teammates, rather than trying to remember the play call, trying to remember the playbook, trying to remember their way to their new house, trying to remember their way to the facility, trying to, remember the new footwork pattern that was taught, or what the defense just did, and what the tip off is that they saw on film last week, in addition to whether they even trust the accountant that they have, or the marketing person, or anything else that's going through their 24, 23, 22, 21-year-old brain, with all this bandwidth that gets taken up. So with Jordan Love, you could tell game one against the Bears or whoever it was that they played, he looked smooth. His footwork was rock solid. He wasn't hesitant about anything. The only thing he was hesitant about is maybe whether he should throw a ball into a certain situation, but everything else was playing to the speed that you need to see. It was fluid. He wasn't too fast or too slow. So what I would recommend to coaches, and really to owners and execs, is that don't use that BS argument of we only have a certain number of years, because there are too many passing leaders and MVPs who you've seen your other peers like extend their contracts with record numbers because they're playing well, um, after they sat for at least a year. If you're going to put them in the game, give them a series, take them out, and then progress to a half. And if they look really bad in the first quarter, maybe you take them out sooner. And then when they can show that they can play a half of football that's good, then keep them in. And then if they really struggle early, take them out. But talk to them, tell them, we're confident in you. Here's what's going wrong. Get a good backup. Make sure you have a decent backup who they can watch prepare, who they can watch do the job, who's seen enough, who's been through some of this stuff, who can help relate to them and help them focus on what to work on and how to work on it. And also then be able to get in there, and you can see them play with a level of confidence that they may be able to do better than the backup when they're playing on all cylinders. But if they're not, they can at least see, the baseline stuff that they should be looking at and go, well, I know I'm better than him. Or even if they're not ever going to say that to anybody, I know I'm better than him, but what he just did, I didn't do. And that's what I need to be doing. So if they do that for at least the first year, maybe two, they would probably recoup more of their investments. And we would have a much richer quarterback situation in our league.
Would you have done that for Bryce Young last year?
Yes, I absolutely would have, after seeing how the interior of that offensive line played. Absolutely. Once they put Andy Dalton in and he played well, I would have kept Andy Dalton in for a few more games, at least, and said, Bryce, look, you're still our guy. We love you. We want you to be great. But Andy has experience handling this kind of pressure, and I want you to watch what he does to throw the ball away, what he does in certain situations with certain blitzes. And we're going to talk about some of that and watch that. And we need you to work on that. And we're going to give you another chance, for sure. and you're going to have plenty of chances to come. But you're this isn't going to be helping you develop into the player that you can be if we keep you in there.
Jordan Love, from what you saw last year, is he legit? And do you expect more of what we saw the second half of the season from him moving forward?
Yeah, I'd absolutely think he's legit because he saw some things with the Detroit Lions early in the season after about the first 3 or 4 games where they played more man and blitzed him and he had some issues. And then he faced them again and he did a better job against it. So I think you're going to see a player who's figured out enough to adjust to the defense's adjustments because most quarterbacks, if any, a lot of some savvy scouts like Russ Landy in the past would tell me, he's like, listen, it takes about 18 to 24 games, maybe even 30 games to really see what you have because the first 6 to 8 games, NFL defenses aren't looking at college tape to scout quarterbacks. They're just waiting to get enough tape in the NFL to see how they handle things. So when you see a quarterback early on in their career start off strong, really what you're seeing is that quarterback playing the way you saw him at college against college defenses. I mean, even if it is NFL defenses, it's like he's showing you the best. If he's playing well, he's showing you what he did in college. And so then they look at that and the defenses say, well, okay, well, here's some things with our defense and our personnel that we can do well. And here are some things that we might be able to stop him with. But we're not going to throw that whole book at him because we don't know for sure. Let's just do a couple of wrinkles and see if that works. And then the next defense builds on what they saw from that game and the next game and next game. And then by like games 8 to 12, sometimes you start to see defenses shut down young rookie quarterbacks and then they have to respond. And especially the next season where they may have a book on a player and they try and throw that book at the quarterback. So with Jordan Love, expect some new twists that will be thrown at him. And he may have some ups and downs again this year, but I don't think the downs will be so low that we'll be wondering if he can be a starter. I think it will just be he'll have a bad game or two or have some bad moments and then overcome them and continue to play at a high level.
So I wanted to ask you more, Matt, about that. I mean, you talk about that defenses began to figure out rookies after 4 games, like you were saying. Maybe it's a little bit later. I guess the question both is, what do you watch for specifically with the quarterback to know that defenses have figured this young rookie out? And then what can like a normal person do when they're watching games to figure that out?
Yeah, I mean, I think that more than anything, what I'm looking for is first, you want to kind of know the baseline strengths and weaknesses that quarterback probably had coming out of school. So if you know a quarterback like, say, Drake May invites pressure by sliding outside the pocket too early when he could have climbed, then you can probably guess that defenses will eventually try to rush him by getting pressure inside the pocket and then getting getting some high edge pressure high enough that it doesn't have to get penetration in the pocket, but it just has to be high enough that they try and encourage him to climb when he probably won't climb. Because more often than not, he'll try to break outside. So if you see him taking sacks where he should have climbed, then you're going to know that defense has figured out if we get high edges and we get someone blitzing up the middle or get some penetration up the middle, he's going to have problems throwing the ball. He's not going to throw the ball away. He's probably going to take sacks or he's going to take hits and try and make throws that make no sense to do. Like that Anthony Richardson throw against Aaron Donald that actually worked. Like you're going to actually see Drake May try and do that and fail miserably. So it's like that'll be the type of thing that you would look for. Or you would look for, I'm looking for late pre-snap reveals from defensive backs because like early pre-snap and say the quarterback has 30 seconds during their alignment phase to the snap to survey the defense. The defenses usually show one thing for about 26 to 27 seconds, maybe 28 seconds. And then in the final 2 to 3 seconds, you start to see a safety creep up or back up or rotate to a different side or a defensive end shift or a linebacker, turn his hips. And those are the little tells that the best quarterbacks recognize and go, I think that this might actually be a zone, but I don't know for sure. I think the key here is going to be what that specific defender does, and then they do it and they see it either in the final 2 to 3 seconds before the snap, or in the first 1 to 2 seconds after the snap. And so if a quarterback's getting, if quarterback's particularly bad at zone, and you see that a team's showing man and then drops into a zone, that might be some things. So what you're looking for is, for instance, I would start with, as a way to start to get better at that, is to learn how defenses line up to show man or zone. Inside shade, when a defensive back or a linebacker has their position inside to the inside shoulder of a receiver, more likely than not, they're playing some form of man coverage. When they're playing an outside shade to the outside shoulder, they're more likely playing a zone style coverage. You learning coverage types can also be helpful, obviously, in that regard, for that you kind of know. But sometimes you have to be cognizant of the fact that NFL sometimes mixes coverage, where you'll see linebackers in a zone look, but safeties and cornerbacks in a man look, or vice versa, or one side of the field's man, the other side zone, or some kind of hybrid of that. But some of those things, you just look for the weakness that you saw, that you hear scouted, and you look for, well, how would a defense defend it, and you look for those opportunities.
And so when you see those opportunities, right? Like when you watch the games and you see kind of these late adjustments for the defenses, then it's on that rookie quarterback to adjust, right? And to see if he can still perform.
Yeah, it's on them to see if they can overcome it, and it's we look at it this way: if a quarterback has one or two blind spots where they're just not good at it, and a defense is able to shut them down, it doesn't mean every defense is going to be able to do it. So that's not as big of a deal. But if they also have game management issues, some accuracy issues, they're limited in what they can do with certain types of drops, they're limited in what they can do outside the pocket or inside the pocket, and a defense can just basically say, we're going to play this hybrid coverage that trips them up, and we're going to send these blitzes and they look like a deer in headlights, then you have some trouble. And so it is incumbent on them more often than not to know whether or not I needed to call a timeout and get some help with what I'm seeing, because I think I saw it right, and know they have the wherewithal to do that, to know when to throw a ball away rather than try and make a hero play, know when to come off that first read and go to the second read, those types of things, when to, what types of blitzes to recognize. So yeah, it's all of that's incumbent on them, and all those variables that can kill or make or break a quarterback is why it's so difficult of a position to evaluate, because, Jalen Reed is completely different from, Kirk Cousins. They're both very good quarterbacks, but you would not mistake, you would, if you put, some sort of fabric over their heads and their entire torso that you couldn't see their skin color, um, and you watch them play football, you could tell either one apart easily, based on their games and how different they are. But that's the thing about quarterbacking. It's not a template form position, but the NFL for a long time has tried too hard to templatize how they evaluate them. And sorry, but Henry Ford had limitations, folks.
I think the take-home lesson here, Matt, is that everyone should read RSP to know what the deficiencies of these rookie quarterbacks are, so we can further enhance the video analysis once we get into next season. Please let everyone know where they can find your rookie scouting portfolio.
I appreciate it. You can find it at mattwaldman.com. It's $21.95. You can get a pre-draft and a post-draft. So if you're a fantasy person, you get a post-draft that's really focused on the fantasy part. If you're more media or into dynasty leagues that draft early, and even redraft leagues, you're going to find that the RSP pre-draft actually is a more evergreen document that even 3, 4, 5 years down the line, when you're looking at players off the waiver wire that you've never even heard of, and you go, who is this guy? You're likely going to be able to read a scouting report about them and see why it might be a good fit with the team they landed and bounced to, or it's not a good fit, and whether you want to take a chance with them. So yeah, mattwaldman.com And I have a podcast, Matt Waldman's RSP Cast, where I do different shows with a variety of people and scouting, athletic training, modeling and analytics, and fantasy football.
I highly recommend checking out RSP. Matt, I usually try to read the entire document before I have guests on the podcast. I have failed every year because your document is over 1,000 pages.
Yeah, it's a choose your own adventure, but it's bookmark. You can find your own thing, but yeah, you're not reading this thing in one sitting.
Nope. You're definitely not reading it in one sitting. But I do want to say, I find that I learn something new every year when I dig into it. When I get to have you on this podcast, so I would highly recommend people check it out. I would really love to see bettors get into it in just the way that we talked about, right? Understand what these quarterbacks are, your pre-flop, your pre-NFL assessment of them, and see how they evolve, right? See if they can fix some of their problems, their decision making, accuracy, whatever it might be. It really sounds like you're kind of undercharging people at less than $22.
Yeah, I'm told that all the time. There's basically three things, if you don't mind. There's three quick things that generally I hear real quick. First is one of my tagline. My tagline often is pleasantly shocking readers since 2006, and most of the time, new readers tell me my mind is blown. I had high expectations, and they're blown away. I had no idea this is overwhelmingly good. And then the second thing is usually I'm going to be a customer for life. That's usually what I hear either in the same email or second year. Like I'm always getting this for as long as you're doing it. And then usually by year 2 or year 3, those subscribers are like, I'd pay double for this, and you really are undercharging for this. I'm sure I will continue. I will raise the price at another point down the line, but it's working out fine. And I like to exceed expectations, and that's what this does.
Well, you certainly have. Matt Waldman, thank you so much for joining me on the show.
Thanks, Ed.
You've been listening to the Football Analytics Show. My name is Ed Fang, your host. I have pleasantly forgotten to do my ad read, but I run thepowerrank.com, and we'll have another show before the NFL draft next week. Thanks again for listening.